Shall we get started? I did say a few more words, but I was on mute, obviously. So welcome back, everybody. I hope that tiny break was much appreciated. It's always nice to take some time off from the screen. So we, in the rest of the webinar, we've got our two fantastic discussants. We will start with Professor Anneleen Forrier from KU Leuven, and we'll take brief questions and answers following Anneleen's discussion, and then we will continue with Dr. Anthony Mann. Anneleen, would you like to share your own slides?
I'll try, see whether that works. Okay. And if it doesn't, I will ask you to help me.
Okay.
Let me see.
If it doesn't, I can put them up and, oh, it's happening.
Can you see them?
Do you want to see if we can move on to the next slide? Okay, perfect.
It works?
Yes, it does.
Okay, that's good. So thank you for inviting me as a discussant for this event. I really enjoyed all the talks that we have had so far, and I see many links with the story that I want to tell you today. So I want to discuss the youth employability from a relational perspective, and maybe bring some a new perspective in the discussion. Now, maybe let me first introduce myself shortly. So one of my research topics is employability. I've been discussing it very often together with Nele de Kuiper, who's also one of the authors of today, among employed and unemployed, but increasingly we are also more looking at economically inactive people and young people not in employment, education or training are part of this group. I'm also teaching, one of the courses I'm teaching is a career guidance course to business administration students. It's a compulsory course, so the students have to follow it. And so I'm having a lot of career talks with undergraduates, third bachelor students. And I've been listening very carefully to the talks of Michelle and Andra, and I got some good advice there. So I'll try and implement what I've heard today in my own course. I'm going to skip some slides because of the time. I was going to discuss some numbers about youth employment and unemployment, but let me immediately jump to the conclusion. I think many of you addressed this issue already. Let me say, when looking at the numbers, it's not a new crisis. I didn't see any increases in numbers in the year 2020 that were the most recent figures or numbers that I got. So I don't think it's a new crisis, but I do see a lot of causes for concern there. And let me give a summary of the causes for concern. I tried to bring everything of the presentations that we heard today together and highlight the causes of concern that have been addressed in the talks. Many of you have been talking about the transition to work and the difficulty to find work, both for graduates, so people with education, but also for young people not in employment, education or training. Some reasons were related to the lack of what we can call career capital. Some other reasons that were also addressed had to do with demand in the labor market. And what was also pointed out was a difficult socio-economic climate that some of the young people are in. So that's a transition to work. Other papers have addressed the quality of jobs. So people in employment are still facing some issues of lack of quality of jobs. So I think Jose Ramos talked about overqualification. We also saw the difficulty of young people not in employment, education and training to find decent jobs. And Andra also talked about the fact that many young people don't have the idea that they have meaningful work. So then the important issue there is that all these things together can have long-term scarring effects on employment and careers, but also on health and well-being. And I think most of you have addressed these issues. So for me, it's that these are the main causes of concern brought together. And I want to look at these causes for concern from an employability perspective. And I also want to raise some questions about the employability perspective and maybe take an alternative view on the topic. Let me first, so the issue here is we want decent and meaningful work for young people. I think we all share that concern, and so it should be high on the policy agenda. And the question is employability the answer? Employability, I'm not going to discuss that into detail, but I'm also referring to the talk of Dora, where she, in her own study, looked at different, and colleagues, of course, at different aspects of employability. A lot of research looks at capital aspects, competencies, what people know, also social capital, who they know, and we call it the input perspective because these are determinants of an individual's potential in the labor market. The output perspective then looks more at how can we assess an individual's potential in the labor market, and many studies looked at perceived employability, and the study of Dora also looked at perceived employability because people act on their perceptions. If they see possibilities, they might want to look for these possibilities. And some research also looks at career outcomes, and we also saw that in that study. And I think that's what educational programs also do, is looking at where do our students, do they find jobs, what kind of jobs do they find. So we can also bring this together, and that's what employability research is also aiming to do. And the idea then is, if you have more capital, you see more opportunities, and that helps you to find better jobs. That again feeds your capital. So the assumption in employability research and policy often is a bit of a gain cycle, from more capital to better employment, and then a feedback loop to increasing capital again. I'm going to question some of the assumptions in employability research, and also assumptions that are often implicit or explicit in policies. And I also want to point out some blind spots here. And I think the study of Beth already pointed out some of the blind spots that I'm going to address. The assumptions in employability research and policy often start from the idea that employability is an individual characteristic. I think Beth said the problem is individualized. So it's something that people are supposed to have, and it depends on their own characteristics, their own capital. Another assumption is then that individuals are free agents, that you can control your career. Once you have the capital, you can get the job that you want. And so that's the gain cycle that I was talking about in the previous slide. And policy, looking at employability from this perspective, mainly focuses on upskilling, on resilience, on individual characteristics and competencies. And we also saw some of these interventions in the talks that we heard now. Then it's about development of career competencies. Career advice and guidance is often, often looking at increasing competencies, and also labor market intervention programs often mainly address individual issues. So the blind spots that I want to address here is that employability is not, you cannot see employability as an individual asset. It's always embedded in a context. And what you need to find a job may be very different between professional fields, may also be very different between countries. So it's not something that you can fully control as an individual. And that's related also to the second blind spot, that the labor market is the interplay between supply side and demand side. And the assumptions above only look at the supply side and often forget the demand side. So the problem becomes individualized, and you can have a lot of competencies but still have difficulties finding good work because maybe good jobs are not available, or maybe there's discrimination in the labor market. So it's not, individuals are not free agents, they always are in context, and the demand side is also very important. And so the third blind spot is that we not only have to look at these gain cycles, but also probably at loss cycles. And I think Eva, her talk also showed how people can have difficulties to be in this positive cycle of good work and gaining more competencies, and can also struggle and maybe become alienated from the labor market because of these loss cycles. And related to this individual look, on employability is that we too often blame the victim. And that can also make people more alienated from the labor market. So policy should also address the context and the demand side. And I think we saw a lot of suggestions here from a more of a stakeholder perspective. And I would like to add something to that. And I would invite you all to look at employability, not as an individual asset, but as relational. And let me briefly explain that.
1 minute, Anneleen.
1 minute, so it will be very brief. So relational perspective on employability means that employability, the starting point when thinking about employability is that it's constructed in relation between the supply side and the demand side. And I think policies, employability policies should focus on this relationship and not be either supply side, such as giving trainings. I think the study of Beth showed that training in itself might not work, nor only on the demand side, like funding for hiring might not work because the risk of hiring might still be too high for employers. So maybe we have to be relational counselors as intermediaries in the labor market and focus on it as a relationship. And let me very, very briefly in 10 seconds tell you what I mean by that is, I think we should, if we look at it from a relational perspective, we might search for a sense of belonging both among young people and among employers. And I borrowed this term from Michelle's talk, a sense of belonging. I think that's often lacking now. Young people don't have a sense of belonging. I also hear it from my students, and COVID doesn't help there. People not in employment, education and training don't have a sense of belonging, become discouraged, alienated. Employers don't feel a sense of belonging because they have this risk of hiring, and also they have very strong ideal worker norms. So I think policy interventions could focus on the relation and really focus on bringing both sides of the labor market together and work on the relationship. And for instance, work-based learning, career exploration, vocational education and training programs, internships are ways of bringing both sides of the labor market together. I can talk a lot more about that, but I think my time's up. So I leave it to that, and maybe we can discuss it more in the questions. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Anneleen. And I mean, I have to say your earlier work in employability has informed a lot of my PhD when I was writing it. And all these discussions you present today are primarily the reason why we're here, why we're trying to bring in researchers, employers, policymakers together in these different events. So it's really refreshing to hear these perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we've got a question from Bill. And Bill's wondering if there are high numbers of young people seeking good quality jobs, where are these jobs expected to come from?
That's a good question. That's the demand side, I think. I think what I also notice in research is this ideal worker norm. And so people, that's the overqualification issue as well, that people get jobs that are below of what they're worth. And I think if we bring employers and employees together, employers might also maybe reflect on the quality of the jobs that they're offering, also in internships. And I think Jose also mentioned that maybe, governments also have to invest in sectors and industries that can offer high quality jobs. But I also think that employers can rethink the work organization that they have. I don't think we have to accept the status quo there. Sometimes jobs can have a higher quality than they actually have at the moment. So I think employers should also be invited to rethink the organization of the work that they in their own organization.
If there's representatives from the employer side or policymakers side, please do feel free to contribute in chat as well or in the Q&As. And I see responses from Andra and Gerardo in the chat that your talk has been inspiring for them as well, Anneleen. So I knew it wasn't just me. Shall we? Oh, great to see issues for young people under discussion again. I noticed that the topics and analysis are much the same they were when I started my work in employability, says David Imber. Is this a good thing, or is this not a good thing that the topics persist as the times change and as we go through different shocks and social changes, economic changes, the topics seem to stay the same? I think that's an interesting question. Shall we move on to hear from our second discussant, Dr. Anthony Mann? Thank you, Anneleen. Thank you once again. And then we can maybe open the ground. It might be easier to actually put thoughts and comments in the chat if there are no specific questions. Unfortunately, the webinar kind of limits our ability to interact. So please do feel free to